Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I'm just so honored to introduce you to Mark Shaw, author of Courage in the Face of Evil. Mark is a graduate of San Francisco Theological Seminary and former defense attorney. He's the author of 26 books. His bestseller, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, The Mysterious Death of What's My Line TV star and media icon Dorothy Kilgallen, has been optioned by Brothers Dowdle Production Company, who produced Paramount Network's Waco miniseries. Mark Shaw was a legal correspondent for ABC, CNN, and ESPN, correctly predicting the outcomes of the Mike Tyson and the O.J. Simpson trials. He's been a reporter for USA Today and featured on various television and radio programs. His book, The Poisoned Patriarch, How the Betrayals of Joseph P. Kennedy Caused the Assassination of JFK, led to his appearance on the Reels Channel special The Kennedys. He is a member of the American Christian Fiction Writers Association and the Society of Professional Journalists. For more information, you can visit courageinthefaceofevil.com or simply markshawbooks.com. Mark Shaw, what an honor and a privilege it is to welcome you to Revealing the Truth.
Well, thank you, but it's my honor to be on your program. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, you have had a classical, stunning career of doing all the things that you love. I remember Dorothy Kilgallen on What's My Line. I remember the Kennedys. I remember much of your work in seeing it in print, seeing it in film. So much so that I have a nephew who is a producer on E60 on ESPN even now. So, you know, the work you did as a investigative journalist, as a reporter, as an author, is something that your name may not be one that rolls off the tip of the tongues of the coffee table today, but you certainly have had a tremendous impact on the literary world and on the world of exposés, of digging into and blowing the lid off of some of the great cover-ups of our time that we need to remember.
Yes, thank you. I told you I'm pretty much the most blessed man in the world. I really am. I thank the good Lord for the journey that I've had. It's had its ups and downs, that's for sure, as we all have. But I'm a man of faith, and the theological seminary changed my life in a lot of ways. But I have been involved in trying to uncover the truth about things that I felt were distorted. And that really is the reason that I was led to this particular book. I had finished The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, and it had done very well, as you said, and there's a follow-up book coming this fall, Denial of Justice, a follow-up book on Dorothy's story. But during that time, as I was writing it, it was all about Dorothy's courage. And in the back of my mind, I had always wanted to publish this book. I had first heard about the diary in the early 1990s in a Midwest newspaper article, and I was able to find the daughter of the woman upon whom this story is based, the diary, and talk to her, and she was willing to let me look at that diary, and I did. And I went ahead and used some excerpts from it in an article and a short book, but I never was able to do the diligence that I felt like I wanted to with it. But as I was writing the Dorothy Kilgallen book, and that's all about courage, it also struck me that we're at a time when there's not enough emphasis put on courage, and especially courage that is based on faith. And in the back of my mind, I thought, you know, this may be the time for this book because there's so much hate in the world, so much division, the school shootings, the racial bigotry, the unwillingness of people to respect each other, and so much hate and all of that. And I remembered that this particular story was really about love overcoming hate. And we all have these interesting moments. Mine usually come in the middle of the night. And the good Lord wakes me up, and I have a little set of note cards where I can write things down. And there was a quote by Martin Luther King that had stayed in my mind that really love is the only thing that can overcome hate. And so I retrieved this manuscript, the diary, and I began to decide that this was the time for this book to be published.
The whole idea of taking a diary from a Christian nurse who was at Ravensbrück, which was the one camp devoted to women during the Nazi rise to power. It was the only Nazi camp exclusively for women, and most people don't really know much about Ravensbrück. Right. They rattle off Auschwitz, Birkenau, Dachau, but Ravensbrück was overlooked for many reasons. The atrocities of the medical experimentation, right. But it was also a center of sewing. They put women to work at sewing stations, sewing socks for the soldiers. And I have a very deep personal connection to Ravensbrück, and that is my grandfather's cousin was in camp there. She lost all of her family on both sides. She was a sole survivor, wound up in a displaced persons camp, and her story was that she was so adept at sewing that the officers liked her work so much that they set her apart from the regular assembly line sewing stations where they were sewing socks, and brought her their uniforms to repair, and they beat her feet, the bottoms of her feet, every day, so that she would not be able to get up and walk away from it to increase her productivity. So in the early 50s, when the displaced persons camps were closed, the word went out for one of the last people to be connected with their family somewhere, and this was a cousin, a distant cousin of my grandfather, and word finally made it to him, and he made the arrangements to have her brought from the displaced persons camp to America, where she came to live and lived out the rest of her life in Pittsburgh, in a little seamstress shop, where she would sit there, very, very short, very heavy Austrian accent, but would talk about just a little bit about her experience, did not want anyone to pity her or feel sorry for her for what she had endured, but always said it with such a deep, weighty sorrow, such a pallor over her of the depth of sorrow that really carried with her all her life, that I don't think that she could ever know what real joy was, for that was so stolen from her. So
but just that she survived was so courageous. You have to think about that, how these women survived, and many of them, like the German Christian woman, Vera, that's in the story, it was all about faith in God. It was all in miracles. I don't think we have any idea, and as I've said, I hope that a lot of young people read a book like this, because these days they think it's a bad day if they don't have 10 hours on their smartphone. They need to realize what courage is all about, and when it involves life and death, like your relative on a daily basis, you have to say to yourself, how could you survive in that situation? Because it would be so easy to give up, wouldn't it?
Well, as they marched them into and most were taken to Auschwitz or Birkenau, to the death camps, and we know, and I've been there, you can see carved into the barracks, carved into the rafters, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Mm-hmm. It wasn't, "Oh Lord, why have you forsaken me?" It wasn't, "Where is my God when I need him?" It was a proclamation, a declaration that the Lord God of Israel knew the plight of his people, and that regardless of what was going to be done to them, that God would provide a way for them, not maybe in this life, but in the life to come. And
that's the only hope they had.
That was
the only hope they had. And I don't know if you've seen the photograph, but I did a presentation at a book signing here in the San Francisco area, and one of the photographs we used was actually a depiction of those women sitting at the tables doing that sewing. You've probably seen that photograph.
I have.
And all you have to do is look at their faces. They're scared. They just don't know when. I mean, look at your relative. They came by and beat her feet. There's so much cruelty in the book, and I believe the diary reflects that because it's all in Vera's words. But with that cruelty, there is that inspiration that we can learn from these kinds of people, that when things are really bad, I mean, not like the things we think are bad today, when things are really bad and you just feel like you want to give up, that there is hope. And as you say, they used the inspiration of Jesus Christ, a man of inclusion, a man who loved everyone, regardless of who they were, where they came from, what their past was. It didn't matter. I get a little chill when I say that, because that's what we need to remember today, and quit all this dividing and everything, and respect others, because all of those women, as you know, they locked together, they connected together because they needed each other to survive. And I'm sure that that's what this relative of yours would say, for sure.
You know, one of the things that Adolf Hitler tried to do at Auschwitz, which is the only camp that tattooed, was because of his pride, he wanted to strip the Jews of every bit of individuality, their complete identity. But in tattooing them, they gave them a unique number. And in giving them a unique number, it was a reminder that they were somebody.
Yeah.
And what his diabolical commitment to his sin to annihilate and to keep such meticulous records of each person so that he could have this claim to fame that he had eradicated an entire race of people, that tattoo was what became the saving grace for some to hold on to the fact that they were somebody unique,
yes.
even if it was just a different number than the person next to them. So, they say every criminal trips himself up somehow. Every criminal leaves some kind of clue behind. This was one of the clues that he left behind that did not strip them of everything. They still had this last piece of their identity to hold on to.
Yes. I want to say too, before I don't want to miss this, that one of the reasons I wrote this book is we can never forget what happened over there. And unfortunately, there is a band of people, not only in the United States but across the world, who just say, hey, there wasn't any Holocaust. As you know, we have a Republican candidate for Congress over here in an adjoining county, and that is his proclamation. Don't vote for this other person. They're like in a fantasy world. There wasn't any Holocaust. It never happened, And so we have to use these kinds of stories, your relative and this story that I found in this diary, to re-emphasize what happened. And one of the clues there, of course, one of the damaging evidence is that number. You can't discount something like that, for sure. So I'm hopeful that this man running for Congress is going to raise the intensity of people thinking about this and recalling what happened and saying this is never going to happen again.
You're an accomplished, in so many ways,
Thank you.
recognized and by your best-selling status, recognized by the work that you've done, which is really in-depth investigative reporting to uncover things that were hidden. Something that we're looking at today, wishing we had more people that were digging into the actual truth and the consequences that go along with the truth. It's interesting that it would be a season in which investigative reporting is something that we don't know who to trust. We've lost faith in the days of the Walter Cronkite, where if he said it, we believed it. If it was, I remember hearing my father say that in this country, if it's in the newspaper, it has to be true, or they would not print it. And there were things in my lifetime that I saw in the 60s and 70s that I knew were not true. And I would say something to him, and it would anger him in his Eastern European way, and saying that if it was not true, it would not be printed. They don't print lies in this country. That is not, this is not what America is. That's something left over from propaganda. That's left over from the old country. That's not this country. If they're on television saying this is the news, Huntley and Brinkley, if Chet Huntley says it, it's true. Yes. These things are true. And so we've lost that. But here you have, of all the things, your heart becomes touched. Not your intellect, not your investigative mind, but this pierced you to your heart to make sure the story was told. And you are right. If we do not remember, it will, and I hate to say, it is happening again. It's happening in Rwanda. It's happening in countries where we are not let in to see the genocide that is taking place. And so we're seeing a Holocaust in the name of Islam. We're seeing a Holocaust in the name of despots and of so many who are dictators and oligarchs who are coming in to overthrow and overrun and to persecute. And we are lulled into this false sense of security here in America that all is well and we're the land of the free, the home of the brave. We're so isolated and so insulated that a story like this comes along. And I will say this to you before we dig into this story. To our Christian audience, what makes you think you will not have to face the exact same decision when the rise of the Antichrist comes? And whether or not you are a believer in a pre-tribulation rapture or a mid-tribulation rapture or a post-tribulation rapture, or you don't believe in the rapture, or you think it's all going to pan out, the fact is 80% of you are wrong. Because the camps are divided equally. And so what are you going to do when you're faced with taking this mark? What are you going to do when your family is put in jeopardy, where you can't buy and sell and trade, as my family and my relatives and the nation of the Eastern European Jews faced at the hands of a regime that said you cannot buy, you cannot sell? The words papers with a question mark, with an exclamation point and a demand, with a Ruger in your hand, was something that you came to understand. And the yellow tag, the Star of David that said Jude on it, was something you had to bear. Are you willing to take the mark?
Yeah.
And you're going to face that in your lifetime.
Sure. Well, I say we are what we write in many ways, and I would like to speak to what you said about Cronkite, Huntley, Brinkley. In my books, I don't speculate. I use primary sources. I don't use anonymous sources or any of that kind of thing. And that was what was so important about this book, is that I found the diary. And, you know, it was translated, and I did very little editing of the diary. I wanted this woman's voice to come forward, because that's the primary source. She was there. This is what happened. Like Dorothy Kilgallen, she was at the JFK assassination, the Ruby trial, all of that. That's what's touched the emotions of readers of that book. And so far, that's what's touched emotions of people who have read this book, that they're reading a true account of what happened at Ravensbrück, and trying to understand exactly why it happened and what they can learn from it. And that's the answer to your second question. What will I do when this time comes that we have to stand up and face the same sort of conditions that those Jews and Christians and gypsies and whoever they may have been faced during World War II? And it all has to do, in my opinion, with hope and with faith. If you lose your faith, and there's so many people out there these days around the San Francisco area especially, we have all of the homeless, we have people in prison, we have people, you know, who have lost faith. They've lost faith in our government. They've lost faith in the news media. They don't know where to turn exactly. And I think with Vera's story, there was only one place that she turned. I also just read a biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer.
Yes.
And he said, you know, when you're troubled, when you have feel like that there's nothing ahead, you've lost your hope, the Bible is the place to go. The scriptures, the more and more thought about who Jesus Christ was, what he stood for. My wife is Taiwanese, and when we first met, we talked about her interest in Taoism and Buddhism and all that, and my interest in Christianity. And we started talking about the differences, and you know what we found? We found we had more similarities than we had differences. So it doesn't matter what the spiritual, feelings are of people. When the time comes when everybody's going to have to stand up and decide how they're going to handle the troubled waters, we must look to Christ, who my wife at one point said, no matter what, he's a great role model. I mean, he was a man of inclusion. He was a man who stood for all the right things. And I say, if we had more people who acted in a Christ-like manner, like this woman in the book did, we'd be much better off these days.
We're talking with Mark Shaw, author of Courage in the Face of Evil. It is a true story based on the diary of Vera Koenig, a Christian German nurse who tells her story of a guard who showed affection to her, how she was able to minister, and what she experienced there in Ravensbrück, and what she lived to tell through her diary, and how it came into your possession. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I really want to dig into the heart of this story and some of the quotes that really resonate, that people can walk away with understanding the depth of the reality and the depth of the courage that it took in the face of imminent loss of life, torture, and complete and total deprivation, even becoming the subject, or the potential to becoming the subject, of mutilation and health experiments that were done at the hands of that horror Joseph Mengele and those who were experimenting on behalf of Nazi Germany. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Mark Shaw, author of Courage in the Face of Evil. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The Teaching Archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, Prophecy in the News videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Mark Shaw, author of Courage in the Face of Evil. Mark, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, sir.
So, Mark, you've discovered out of an article in a Midwest newspaper the existence of this diary written by a Christian German nurse during her incarceration at Ravensbrück concentration camp, which was a Nazi camp for women. Why would a Christian German nurse be incarcerated in a camp?
Yes. Well, when I found out about this, that was one thing that intrigued me. She was very active in Berlin, passing out flyers, helping Jews, hiding them, all of that. Unfortunately, one of the members of the underground turned her in. As she says in her own words in the diary, she had a 5-minute trial. They decided she was a political prisoner, and she ended up at Ravensbrück. And here she is in the midst of all of this turmoil and trouble and tragedy and cruelty and everything. She had always wanted to be a doctor. And so she kind of self-taught herself to be a nurse, and she ended up in the barracks where she could help people. And I want people to come away with several things to think about, but she was what I would call a true angel of mercy. She helped everybody. She didn't care where they came from, gypsies, Jews, prostitutes, thieves, whatever. She was a person who wanted to help them in any way she could. She passed food to them and sometimes her own food. She was a woman who, when medical supplies, there's a very dramatic moment in the book when she realizes there's no medical supplies for the women in her barracks or the children, and she goes into a very inflammatory situation because one of the Nazi head nurses, when she walks in, tell her to get the hell out of there, don't come around here, and she says, we don't have any medical supplies, and there are German women in there, and that kind of softens the head nurse, and she's able to get all of these supplies. In fact, as she's walking out, the woman ends up throwing them at her. But Vera didn't really let that stop her. She just continued on to do everything she could to save one life at a time. That's all it was. And some of the women she didn't like. Some of the women she thought were traitors. Some of the women she hated. But she didn't take that. She took it and turned it around into loving everyone and deciding that everyone deserved at least to survive. And as you know, the main part of the story is one that broke my heart when I first read it. And it's about her. At one point, they take a lot of the orphan children into her barracks. And there's one little girl named Andrea. And Andrea is going to be shipped out to another concentration camp with the inevitable situation where she's going to be exterminated. Well, Vera takes to this little girl and starts hiding her, if you can imagine, under floorboards and in closets and under crawl spaces, anything to keep her away from the Nazis. And so that goes on for a period of time. But then, as you may know, she gets in trouble herself. Vera does by being somebody turns her in for giving the gypsies and Jews sneaking food to them, and she's going to her sentence is to be beaten and to be put in one of the jail cells. And this is so dramatic because I want people to think about what they would do here. What's she going to do with the little girl? And she gets some people in other barracks to take her for a while, but as the jail sentence gets more realistic, what's she going to do? Well, you'll see the buildup over months that there's a German prison guard who visits her barracks, and she hates him at first. She doesn't want anything to do with him. He doesn't stop the cruelty. There's a woman dragged by the hair across the compound, and he doesn't do anything. She just hates him. Why do I hate him so much? But over a period of time, she soon realizes that there may be some good in this person. And there's good in everybody, as you know, Rabbi. Good in everybody, no matter how bad they are. And she recognizes this. And then as time goes by, he makes some comments about, I don't want to be here either. They were going to shoot my family, kill my family if I didn't sign up. She starts to realize that there is good in this man, and her feelings of hate, she keeps asking herself, Lord, what should I do? Should I hate this man, or should I be able to perhaps trust this man? So when every other possibility has been exhausted, she decides, and it's a very dramatic scene where she breaks down and sobs and tells him the story that she is saving the little girl. Well, what are the risks here? That he can either help, or he can have the little girl and Vera taken to the death wall, that they called it, and shot. And so she has the worst night of her life. The prologue of the book is from the diary, where it's the first night the worst night of her life. Why was I so stupid? Why could I think I could trust this guy? All of that. Yet he comes back in the barracks, and she's so nervous and sweating and everything. He leaves her a note and tells her that he will help. And she just thanks God for this miracle that may take place. And then the most dramatic part, I think, in the book is when they have the exchange late at night. It's in the compound, and Vera and one of her fellow prisoners, they take the little girl into this darkened area as the floodlights are blasting across the sky. They see two figures there, and they don't know whether it's the SS or whether it's this German prison guard and his close friend. It ends up being the German prison guard, and they do help with the little girl, hiding her for the rest of the war in a little pig farm outside the camps. So love overcoming hate is the theme here, and that can happen in any situation, but I hope people will read this story, especially young people, read this story and find hope when there's such desperation, because even when we think things can't get any worse, they can, but there always is going to be that hope, and Vera is a beacon of light for hope.
There's a quote from Vera that says, good and evil both need deception to survive. Mm-hmm. It's a very powerful, powerful statement.
Yes.
What did she mean by that? How did she use that? And as you look at it in a modern day application to the events of today, how does that message resonate with what's happening in our world today?
Well, we're always trying to find the truth. Bonhoeffer in the book talks about as a pastor and a theologian and always trying to figure out what the truth was. And it's the same thing with Vera. It's the same thing with all of us. We're always trying to figure out what that truth is. I like for my books to be a stop and think type of book, and I hope people will see that quote and make up their own mind. But what it means to me is that she was struggling with the fact that with evil, obviously deception is going to be a part of evil, but it is a part of good as well. Well, she was having to tell lies about what she was doing. She was having to hide the fact that she was hiding the little girl. Was that okay? Was that the Christian way of living? Was she doing it for the right reasons or not? And many of us face that situation in our lives. We don't know whether we're headed in the right direction or not, because if we have to be deceptive to get more toward the good and toward the truth, is that worthwhile? And I think that by reading her words and how she figured that out in her mind, I can tell you right away now that I've been criticized for writing this book. I've gotten some nasty emails so far. I've had some people who said, why are you writing about the Holocaust? It never happened. But also, this woman was a traitor. She collaborated with the enemy. Mark, what are you trying to? You're trying to have the perception that this is this holier than thou woman and all of that. But I've said to them, with the nasty comments aside, I've said, look, you need to put yourself in that woman's situation, and what is at stake is a little girl's life, one person's life. What would you do in that situation? There are no other possibilities. Nobody else is going to help you. Would you take the risk of trusting the enemy, or would you just basically say, all right, well, it's just one more life, that's it. I'm not going to go ahead and do this. I want people to put themselves in that situation and decide what they would do.
Didn't Jesus give us the same scenario in the story of the Good Samaritan?
Oh, very well said. Very well said. Yes.
What would you do when you're faced with it? The religious passed him by, the locals passed him by, but one, not only did he stop and render aid, but he secured aid for the future to make sure that this person that was a total stranger to him was taken care of. Is that not the message of our faith? And if 72% of America identifies as Christians, then are you only hearing from 28% of the population? I would suggest that some of the people that write to you are Christians who might be critical of this, who have not looked at the same situation. What if it was you who were in captivity? Would you not want someone to advocate for you? Just because you're in the lap of luxury today, it's easy to criticize. Vera is a self-described Christian, and this exposure to pure evil,
Right.
evil so strong and so powerful that Adolf Hitler's commitment to his sin was stronger than the European church's commitment was to Jesus.
That's right.
This is the parallel we have to see, that he was so much so that the pastors were engaged in it and supported. The Catholic Church was complicit in it. There was a silence of the parishioners, a silence of the communities in which these camps existed. There was no outcry. America turned away ships of Holocaust survivors. Countries turned them away. Our hands are stained with blood from this very situation. Yet here is a woman who is exposed to the purest form of evil. Right. And that is the hatred of one man, one of God's creations, for another one of God's creation, to mete out justice which is not of heaven. Right. It is purely of hell. What happens to her faith in this journey?
Well, people are going to learn what happened after the war. After the Ravensbrück camp, they were liberated, the women, and she had spent some time at Auschwitz and all of that. But they're going to find out what she and the little girl ended up doing for the prison guard. He had saved their lives, and she was going to do something for it. But I want to speak to your point too about this whole God thing, because you mentioned Hitler. And if you go back and look at many of his speeches, it was God this and God that, and thank you, Lord. And when the last of the conspirators tried to kill him, he was saved by God. We have to watch people who throw around that name, God, in the name of God or whatever. Is that really from their heart, or is that propaganda? And I would say to you that if you look at just a simple woman like Vera, you know, who had this whole life ahead of her, just like your relative did, you know, we don't know any, there's no way to know what would have happened to them if they hadn't been incarcerated in these camps and things. They had their whole life ahead of them. But the only thing that that Vera had was God. It was in her heart. There wasn't any phoniness about it. There wasn't any fake news about it. There wasn't anything about it. It was inbred in her somehow or another from her early faith. And with God by her side, she had that feeling that, that miracles could occur. A couple times she says, "Oh, are there any miracles left?" But that was when she was just so despairing, as seeing those cruel acts happen every day. You know, women marched across. I've been a big advocate for women's rights in my life. I don't know that I've ever been a bigger one in terms of the women's rights that were violated during the Holocaust. You read just such disturbing things. I mean, in my vision now, I'll have trouble in my mind seeing your relative sitting there sewing and them beating her feet, for God's sakes. It's hard to even imagine that that would happen. But if we have God by our side and we have a spiritual nuance about us, like Vera, we're able to help others, we're able to inspire others, and we're able to lead the kind of a Christ-like life that I think is expected of us.
So she, for this guard, made efforts to intercede on his behalf. Is that correct?
Yes, and you know, I want to make sure I say every Holocaust story is so worthwhile. They all must be read and read and read. If you haven't been to the Holocaust Museum, you need to go there and get this feeling that I've never forgotten since I was there. And every Holocaust story is important, but I had never found one like this, where there was the example that's easily seen of a woman hating a person, deciding that love could overcome hate, and saving the life of a little girl like this. And I don't want to give away the entire ending to the book because it's brought tears to so many people's eyes. But she and the little girl decided that this man and his friend, his guard friend, had saved their lives. And they were not going to stop until they could at least try to save his, because if he had survived, and they didn't know if he had, they knew that he would probably be brought to a war crimes trial and tried and hung or whatever that way. But that's the other inspirational part of this, is that they decided they were going to try to find him, find out what's happening to him, and when they do, I will tell you, some more miracles occur.
It's important for us to remember, not just because it's inbred into our Jewish history, but to understand the origin of this hatred, and it goes all the way back into the book of Genesis to Genesis 3:15, where the oldest prophecy of the Bible is given that there will be enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Mm-hmm. If Satan can take the Jewish people out, Jesus never would have been born. If Satan can take the Jewish people out today, Jesus never comes back. And we have to understand that the evil that permeates this world is to advance a kingdom that is not of God. And I really don't care what your faith is. We have one book that has survived the test of time, that we have the actual scrolls from thousands of years ago that are the same as the scrolls today, and regardless of what your faith system is, when you have evidence that demands a verdict, we have that evidence that demands a verdict. And if we understand the inherent plot and that is to exterminate the Jews, the small remnant of people. There's only 14 million of us. Historically, we are the only people group in the world whose population has diminished from 1939 to present day. Every other people group has increased.
I didn't realize that.
1939, we were 18 million. In 2018, we're 14 million. Okay? We're 4 million below where we were in 1939. No other part of the population has diminished. All other parts of the population, every race, every origin have increased. The Jews are still trying to recover from the Holocaust. And the world has this inherent anti-Semitic understanding of the Jews are responsible for everything. They want to blame us for the Titanic. That was an iceberg, not a Goldberg.
Yes.
So, I always try to make that clear.
Yes.
We have been the most persecuted and most maligned people in history, and it's because we are the lineage of the Messiah, and there's going to be this evil that will try to eliminate us. But God, regardless of all that we have been through, has committed in His Word that He will always reserve for Himself a remnant so that salvation can be brought back to this fallen world we're in.
I don't know if it bothers you as much as it does me, but all of these labels with people, Vera didn't care if people were Jewish.
Right.
She didn't give a darn. She didn't care if they were gypsies. She didn't care if they were prostitutes. She didn't care if these women were whatever they were. The Romania, at one point, women from Romania and Bulgaria take the little girl in at their barracks and save a Russian orphan. It didn't care. People are just people, and it's distressing to me what you're saying about the Jewish population having decreased. It's just mind-boggling. I'm going to have to really think about that some. But that's really distressing, and it's just cruel. I just can't imagine it. Anyway, the point is that people will read about a woman who was in Jesus's mold. It didn't matter where they were from, who they were, their past, whatever, because when human survival, you're talking about a time when human survival may very well be at stake. Well, we're really not going to care about a situation where we're going to try to say, okay, well, I don't really like that person because they're Jewish or this or that or whatever. When human survival is at stake, love can overcome hate, or respect can overcome disrespect, or division can overcome, we can overcome division, all of that. And that's the symbol of Vera Koenig.
Mark, the passion that you tell the story with, obviously there's something that's personally invested from within you into this story, maybe as much, if maybe not more, than the other books you've written where you were the journalist, you were uncovering the facts, you were doing the fact-finding, you were doing the digging, and you had a certain connection with the characters in which you were writing about. This one pierced your heart and changed you in a profound way.
It's the most important book I've written. There's no question about it in my mind, especially because it's in her voice. And it's given me a new spiritual feeling about, I was up in San Francisco a couple of days ago, and you can't walk down the street without seeing a homeless person or a disturbed person or somebody who just looks like they're on their last leg. And they're coming right out of the subway. There was a woman sitting there with a little baby and needing money. And when I walked upstairs, my way back, there was a woman with a little dog in her arms. Well, I'm going to help that person. I don't care if it's my last dollar. I'm going to help that person. We never know whether it's legitimate or not, or whether it could be a ruse, but I'm not going to take a chance in that situation. I'm going to reach out to someone and do what I can to help them. And I'm not going to go up there and ask, listen, I want to know more about you. I want to know where you're from. I want to know if you could you possibly be Jewish or something like that. I'm not going to ask those questions. I'm going to help. And that's what Vera was all about, and that's what touched me. And I hope that I can take the way she lived on in my own life, in my daily experience.
When Jesus was asked the question, what are the two greatest commands? He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. This sums up the law and the prophets. He said to give to the one who asks you. And I'm just coming out of a situation where many years ago somebody asked me to help them, and they turned and wound up betraying me, and I was stuck in this situation to help them. And I carried a little bit of bitterness about it, and today I wrote the check to pay it off and said, you know what, Lord, for whatever reason you allowed me to go through this, I'm now releasing it. I'm now taking care of it. I'm no longer going to carry the burden of it. I'm done with it. I wash my hands of it. I release it into your hands for you to do with it what you will. I must make sure that my hands are clean before you, Lord God. So I'm going to finish this. In their time of need, they asked, and I helped. And then I found out that I was taken advantage of. All right, I'm going to live up to my part of it. I did it for the right reasons, and my heart was right, and now I'm going to finish that and finish well. I think the message for all of us is compassion for our fellow man until we walk in their shoes, until we walked in Vera's shoes, until we walked in Gisela, my cousin, until we walked in her shoes and knew the plight and the pain of her story and what she saw with her eyes that she never spoke about, but that she carried with her, so much so that her stature was diminished by the weight of the memory. We cannot live this way and treat each other the way we're treating each other, and this polarization and this hatred only adds to it, to where these are the days of Noah, and the hatred continues to grow. Mark, you've touched my heart. You've allowed for my family's story to continue on.
Sure.
For those that know the story of Corrie ten Boom, this is the camp that Corrie ten Boom came out of, Ravensbrück. And if you have a heart for humanity and you're looking for a story that will touch your heart and shore up your faith, and help you get some clarity of what the real message of God is in this day, this is a book for you. It's not a story about the past. It's a story about the present, and it could very well be a story about the future. Courage in the Face of Evil by Mark Shaw. Mark, thank you so much for sharing this incredible story with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, sir. Bless you.
God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.